Kate Sweetman is an author, editor, a leadership consultant, and a celebrated speaker. She is the founding principal and chief talent officer at her company. Kate worked as an editor at the Harvard Business Review and currently working at MIT's Legatum Centre for Development and Entrepreneurship. She was also an advisor at Yale University for Women's Leadership Initiative. Kate has been named the Emerging Guru from the Times of London and was listed as Thinkers 50 for her body of work during her career. She co-authored Leadership Code and Reinvention. She also has a BA from Yale University and an MBA from Harvard Business School. We are here today with the wonderful Kate Sweetman. Kate is here all the way from Boston, one of my favorite cities. I was there at school and I remember it very fondly. Kate is superwoman as far as I'm concerned. She's a Harvard graduate. She was an editor at the Harvard Business Review. She's a mother of two lovely daughters. She's traveling the whole world. She's traveling the emerging markets and giving her sort of insights and learnings and research and thoughts and connecting all the dots together. And she's going to wonderful places like Malaysia, Pakistan, and now today in Dubai. She's talking to us about invention and reinvention. And this is actually the title of her book, Reinvention. And we're delighted and privileged to have you, Kate. Welcome.
It is I who am delighted and privileged. I love being here.
It's so wonderful. You know, you're one of those people that the very first time I met you, when you connect and you feel a sense of chemistry and connection, honestly, and I actually felt that the very, very first time I met you. So,
Same goes.
Absolutely. And then we've evolved and developed from there. So wonderful to see you again. Take us back to your life. What is your story? Where do you come from?
Third child in the family.
Yeah.
I had an older brother, older sister. Definitely benefited from being the youngest in the family because I sort of understood how the system worked. So I sort of set my sights on academics, which is very highly valued in my family. So I did go to Yale, which was a fantastic experience. It's close to my heart. I have my reunion coming up. I won't tell you which number, but that's coming up in just a month, like a month from today. I think I'll be at my reunion. And I majored in English. I was really lucky to come from a family who said, I mean, nowadays, I guess you'd say follow your bliss or whatever, but the idea was to just study what you loved and try to be good at that. And I think that was such a fantastic message to get. So while even in whatever year it was, I was in college, majoring in English wasn't probably the most practical thing you could do. It has certainly served me very well. And I'm a huge believer in the liberal arts, which I know is where you're going.
Absolutely.
After what I heard you say yesterday.
It is an important degree to have because I think English sort of sets you up for learning, for literature, for journalism, for narrative, for branding. There's so many advantages for psychology.
For thinking for yourself. Because the thing that I loved about the English major, besides the fact that I got to read novels, you know, was that it's just you and the text. It's just you and the text, and what do you think about it? And what do you get out of it? And what themes do you see? And what do the details tell you? And I think that for me, those are very transferable skills into exactly the work that I do now. Because when I work with an organization, the first thing you do is go in and say, well, what's really happening here? And what needs to happen here? And then how can we help close the gap? So I wasn't kidding when I said certain sorts of people thought that an English major was a waste of time. But it's so not a waste of time. It was a fantastic preparation for the life that I live right now.
Last year was the year of reading in this country. And so every child was given a book to read, and reading was being celebrated, which is interesting. Do you think reading is fading away in terms of its purity and its ability to imagine stuff and get yourself, you know, completely immersed in a story?
Yeah, we're all afraid of that, aren't we? And by the way, I was reading the local paper this morning, and I saw that they had that reading contest going on. I think that's fantastic. Because I do think it does require more of you, more of your own imagination. I can't not read. a novel myself. I'm actually reading one right now that I really can't put down. It takes place in 1850 in China, and it's a story of two girls. Anyway, but I actually think you're right, because just today I was ordering a book on Amazon, and I noticed that the order in which they direct you toward which department do you want to order from is video, movie and TV, and then books. Yeah. And I think if books were more ordered, they would be the first category.
Indeed, and I think part of the work that I do, and I'm looking at technology versus humanity and automation versus how we evolve as human beings. One of the things I was reading was that there's a thesis that kids really don't need to read anymore, in the sense that everything you can speak into it. So therefore, why do you want to read something? Because voice recognition is sufficiently strong now. What kind of advice would you give to young people today, or parents with young children today, in terms of getting kids to read?
Well, I think reading is incredibly important, and I think writing is incredibly important. And I speak as a former editor, because when I was an editor at HBR, sometimes what we would do is we would adapt a book to an article or a speech to an article. And a great speech is quite a different thing from a great article.
Yeah.
And we all know this, because you can, and I say this as a speaker as well, you can say a lot less in a speech. You can sort of articulate yourself in a sense better, because it's more about repetition and it's more about entertainment. And I'm not saying that as a criticism, it's just a different medium. When you write, you need to be much more succinct, you need to be much more, I don't mean to say thoughtful, but you just need to plan it out a lot better, because people interpret it, they interpret it more rigorously. So I personally think, and having been an editor to a lot of very well-known people who are super smart, but who actually have a harder time articulating themselves than you might realize, I value writing very, very much for how much it requires of us to clarify our own thinking.
Let's come back to your early days. Any moments of inspiration, any memories from your young days, a father or a teacher or a mother who said something to you that helped you define yourself?
I think there have been a lot of people, who have had a huge impact on me. I mean, of course, my parents, who are, had very different styles, and in a way different messages, but both helped me tremendously in their own ways. I was just talking about my mother the other day with somebody, and I think, she did a lot of things that, great moms do. One of which was she sort of helped me pass my own anxiety around, doing a good job, for example. Some people fall into the trap of wanting to be perfectionists, which I actually don't, but I still want to do a good job. And my mother said something to me that I always carried with me, and I take it to my own children, and I think it helps me a lot every single day, which is, you can only do the best you can do in this moment, right?
That's good. That's great advice.
You can only do the best, and I think that takes a lot of pressure off.
Yeah.
But I think for my dad, he was a really creative guy, actually, but also very logical at the same time. He really had that, both sides, and so he was my tutor in my trigonometry class. I'll never forget this. And whenever I feel like, okay, I need to calm down, get organized, and more logical, I can just, I re-see that kitchen table that I sat with him at, to do that. So I know that. But I had some really terrific teachers, my guidance counselor. I came from a very supportive place.
You're very lucky. You're very fortunate.
I'm very fortunate.
So moving forward from your school days, getting into business, what was your first job?
Oh, I had a terrible job.
Okay.
Really terrible. I made some very bad decisions, but to my credit, I would keep moving.
Okay.
So I was certainly willing to recognize a mistake. So I don't want to name names, but I don't know what possessed me. But I took this really dumb job right out of college. I think I felt I needed a job out of college. Yeah. I didn't want to not have one. And actually, I was coming from a place of fear. I was afraid to go into publishing because I thought, oh gosh, if I don't like it, then where I go. So I wanted to sort of start in this other place, and that would be like my fallback. I don't know, it's crazy. I'm not saying it made sense, but it was the 80s. You know, everybody was going to business school, and so anyway, I took this marketing job, and it was with a terrible company in a dying industry. It was such a bad idea. And as soon as I got in, I wanted to get out. But I'll tell you, it was actually a good experience in the sense that, you know, again, our business is reinvention, right? And so I took a job at the textile industries in the 1980s, a dying industry, right? And I was surrounded by all these middle-aged men, you know, at the time, who were all watching their life's work become less and less relevant, and who were very, very afraid, and for good reason, because they had very antiquated systems. They really couldn't compete, and Asia was taking away their business. So I've lived, this reinvention thing is not new. And I've been at the epicenter of a very sad story. And so I can empathize very much empathize with what people face when they see this world changing all around them and they really don't know what to do. And in their case, they were just hoping they could retire. Like, can this thing last? Can this thing last long enough so that I can retire from here? Yeah. So, so I had a terrible job. And then I sort of bailed out of that into a kind of another bad job. Then I thought, oh, no, I'll go to law school. So I took a job as a paralegal, and then I was like, okay, then I'm never going to law school after that. And then I got a terrific job. So I had 4 jobs in 4 years. Right. 4 jobs in 4 years. So, you know, bing, bang, bong, just trying to try new things. And finally I said, you know what, I will do this business thing. I better go to graduate school. So that's when I applied. I applied to 3 schools and ended up going to Harvard. And that ended up being a really good choice. So for anyone out there who doesn't know what they want to do, very few people do, and you just got to keep looking.
It's interesting you're saying that, because I think a lot of, and this is much more of a modern thing where people are tinkering and trying and
I was the first millennial. I actually think I was the first millennial. I was just born in the wrong era, but you know, very, very much about self-actualization, very much about keeping moving. Very much about finding your passion, your thing. And I don't know why I felt the freedom to do that, except maybe in effect, I kind of was taught that by, you know, my parents, who said, do what you love.
So how did you end up with Harvard Business Review?
So, well, I went to Harvard Business School, and I stayed for an extra year as a research associate, which was really great. I love doing research, and I love kind of getting the inside story. And the Harvard methodology, as you may know, is the case method. Yeah. So you're not doing, you know, it's not big data, it's stories, it's storytelling. So you see how the English thing starts to play in. Yeah. So I just had a very cool job where you go in and you interview people and you find out their story and put it together in a compelling way. So that was a lot of fun. And then I went from there to working for a consulting firm that, as we said, convert strategy into action. I didn't even know it was HR, actually. I was converting strategy into action. So we had so I'm giving you some backstory here. Yeah. So we basically worked with the Fortune 200. So Johnson & Johnson, Bristol Myers Squibb, you know, the Titans, British Petroleum, Chase Manhattan Bank. I mean, all these guys. And so it was a tremendous training ground. And it was back in the day when they used externals to do proper needs assessment. So we would go in and just interview 60, 70 people and get the story and figure out. It was great. I mean, it was a lot of work, but it was such a tremendous learning ground. And I did that and then I would write cases and we would develop the programs and do the leadership. But it was really, I was on the road a lot. And so I was just very fortunate to hear about an opening at Harvard Business Review, and I went in and interviewed for it, and they make you do a lot of free editing to see if you're any good, and fortunately I passed, and so I was incredibly lucky. I got the job as the editor on the leadership area. I mean, it was incredible.
You must have met all sorts of wonderful people while you're doing that.
I did. I had fantastic. I worked with Ron Heifetz. I worked with Jim Collins. I worked with Dave Ulrich. I mean, I just worked with tremendous people, and it was a great learning ground, and it was actually a great confidence booster, because I was really able to, be of service, in a meaningful way, with these people who are, stars.
So in this, so while you were looking at leadership with all of these amazing leaders, and I know you mentioned Dave Ulrich, who I've worked with, they are great leaders. What kind of attributes, leadership attributes, did you find that were consistent and constantly coming out, whatever the kind of case studies you were working on?
Yeah, well, I guess I would fast forward to the book that I ended up writing with Dave Ulrich. But I also have to give a huge nod to Ron Heifetz, because I love his work on adaptive leadership. And I think that it's very, very relevant to this reinvention work, because he really deals very sensitively and pragmatically with this notion of, how much change can people stand? And that it's really the job of the leader to be sensitive to that, and to realize that there will be stress and there will be strain, and you need to take people through at a pace that they can tolerate. So I think that that to me is very, very important. And I've seen over and over and over in my consulting work how important having an ability to calibrate that really is.
It's interesting you're saying that, because now with the kind of Moore's law and exponential growth, and the growth curve is so steep, how does that fit in with allowing people to have their pace? Because I don't think there's any facility left for that.
Well, that's interesting, because I just came from, I haven't even talked to you about this, but I had to leave early a pilot program that we were doing in Samui, in order to be here for NACIBA. And it's actually around personal reinvention. And the question is, how can you boost your resilience? How can you quickly get yourself into a place that you can shapeshift without losing, without becoming exhausted, or just losing, all ability to cope? So we were experimenting a lot with different ways of looking at how to boost, sort of centeredness and mindfulness. We worked with a free diving master on that. We worked with an energy healer who was, how to sort of address your issues in an extremely quick way. So our personal reinvention workshop is really helping people to understand very quickly, how to get from dissatisfaction to a proper path, and then what they need to create around themselves so they can succeed. Get to execution.
Tell us,
I hope that was helpful.
That was actually, and I think contextually it helps a lot in terms of how you can start bridging things, because I'm a great believer in looking at alternative methods as opposed to just, because I grew up on grit and hard work. You know, you can just push through and just, but I think now a lot of mindfulness and meditation and healing and learning, all of those elements are an integral part of our growth. And I think those are the things I've started adopting. Sometimes not that successfully, but I started adopting.
We should really try free diving.
Okay.
Because we all try to do mindfulness and meditation. We all keep falling off that ladder. But there was something about that environment, being in the warm water and everything that made it much more possible.
Indeed.
So to your question, I agree. So people can only stand so much. So how do we boost their ability to stand more?
Yeah.
And so that's part of what we're experimenting with in our work. And I think with ourselves and with other people, how can we help people to not mind, in effect, to disconnect from worrying about, I'm not doing today what I did yesterday. I'm not hanging around with the same people. I'm not doing the same thing. I'm going into a new place. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I can find in myself the confidence to go forward.
So what is that element inside you which builds confidence? Because your earlier jobs were based around being scared of not having a job or not the right job, so you moved fast and tried out a lot of things. What do we need to build inside us as an average person out there? What's the essence of what we need to build to be resilient and keep coping with these changes in the world?
Yeah, I think it's to build a faith in ourselves that we can grow in whatever direction we need to grow.
It's about courage.
it's about courage. We can grow in so many different ways that we just don't do, because we're not challenged, or we have a mental model of ourselves. We're sticking to an old definition of who we are, and so I think that's what we're trying to push on and experiment with.
Tell us about the book and how it's helping you articulate your message better, and how is it helping companies and individuals within companies. So tell us about the book.
Yeah, okay. So what we find people are really resonating with in the book is this whole idea. We describe sort of the spectrum of, we're sort of naming the problem, or naming the challenge, or naming the opportunity, whatever you want to call it. The spectrum of change that's somewhat foreseeable, that we can help prepare ourselves for, which is where you hope to be, right? And then the change that's just boom, that takes you over. And we use some metaphors to get at that people really identify with, I think. And the takeaway from that is, you do want to be out there sounding, listening to the environment, having buoys out there, listening devices, whatever metaphor you want. But really what you need are people inside who have courage, who are, the word we use is fearless, who just believe in themselves that whatever is coming, they will be able to cope with. They will be able to do that. And they'll be able to rally people around them to figure it out. And we see this over and over again. I mean, in our previous work, it's just happening faster now. So let me give you for instance, an example. One of the most interesting and rewarding projects I ever worked on was with Verizon, which is a huge American telecommunications company, which for some reason everyone on the planet has heard of, even though they're in the United States only. I've never figured that one out. And they are the merger of Bell Atlantic and GTE. And when they came together in 2000, the challenge that Ivan Seidenberg, who's a fantastic CEO, and his senior leadership team faced was, how do we help change people inside the organization so that this huge company with 200,000 people in it will be able to move like nimbly and with grace in an environment where there's new technologies popping up all over the place, right? And the whole reason why we have these baby bells is because there's technology changes and new things happening. And so what they needed to do was to create a cadre, a whole population of people who no longer looked up for the boss to tell them what to do, which is how they'd been raised, which in fact is why they'd gone to work for AT&T, right? But who in fact instead looked out and saw things, either a customer need or a new technology, and would bring that back inside and would alert people and would form teams. And it was a completely different way of learning. How do you get people who will, who will own that and bring it inside the organization? And in fact, when we went in to do our work with them, we were used to working more with the senior leadership and the director level, and they said, well, we want to work with you, but we actually want you to work with the frontline workers and their supervisors. And I was like, oh my God, okay, not frontline workers, but the supervisors and the people above them. We said, why would that be? And they said, because they're the most important people in this organization. Because they're the ones who are actually encountering all the stuff that we need to know about. And so what you need to do is help them to realize that they all need to be leaders. They all need to be leaders. It's not about us telling them what to do. It's about them being the sensing organisms out there who will bring things in and then figure out how to make it happen. So that's very exciting. And they needed to be somewhat fearless. They needed to make mistakes. They needed to take on entirely new behaviors. They needed to conceive of themselves differently. They needed to let certain things go and take on other new things. They basically had to go through what it is we're talking about, in this book. And they had to understand themselves better. And they had to understand other people better. Yeah. I heard you talk yesterday, and you said, listen, the future is all about building trust, and the future is all about building community, and the future is all about building interconnectedness. And you're absolutely right. And that's what these people knew 15 years ago. And that's why they are so successful. Yeah.
The last time I saw you present, you spoke about blindfolds, and I found it fascinating because I can totally empathize and relate to several of them. And I'm embarrassed to
I
admit.
can relate to all of them.
Exactly. I'm embarrassed to admit that I do. But I'm also aware enough and conscious enough to be able to take them off regularly and peek out. What are those 6 blindfolds that you find that companies and people in those companies encounter all the time?
Okay, so our topic is reinvention, right? So in order to reinvent, you have to be able to see clearly.
Yeah.
You have to be able to see reality clearly. And what we find is that we don't, right? And so this is why we're surprised. So what we call the 6 deadly blindfolds are our way of just naming these things these things that people allow to get in their way. So these are self-imposed blindfolds, like arrogance, like not listening to negative feedback, like not paying attention to what your competition is doing, which might be better than what you're doing, like not really understanding, empathizing with, stepping into the shoes of the customer, but trying to just impose something on them, like avoiding the unavoidable, riding a disaster down in. So those are the kinds of things that we call blindfolds. And I've worn them all. Many companies wear them, and they're eminently destructive, and they can also be taken off.
I understand exactly what you're saying. However, it affects companies much more than individuals, or does it affect individuals too? So young people.
Wearing a blindfold?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, they completely affect individuals.
Okay.
So, I understand some of your listenership might be people looking for jobs, right?
Yes.
So if you have blindfolds on
Yeah.
because you're anxious or fearful, and so you're not really taking in the right information, you may be dismissing important information.
Right.
So one, you may go in for a job interview and you may be arrogant. You may think they're lucky to have me, and they're going to pick up on that, and they will not want you, right? You may find that you're not getting jobs even though you go on interviews. Well, there is some feedback coming at you in that process that you really should seek information on.
If you were to hire somebody, what sort of 2 or 3 attributes would you be looking for? Would you be looking for degrees and masses of qualifications, or what else would you be looking for?
That's a great question, because I don't think it's all about your degrees and masses of qualifications. I think it's much more around your energy and your intention and what can you do with it. And do you have a certain amount of the skill set to make that happen? But over and over and over again, we see people who I think I've heard you say hide behind their skill set or hide behind their resume, which can make them think they're better than they are.
Oh, the phrase I use is trying to hide behind your finger. You actually can't, because yes, you have a big fat degree, but that's just not enough. And especially in the new world where learning and courage and trust and all of those elements coming in are far, far more important.
Yeah, I mean, I've had the privilege of going to Yale and Harvard, so I could say that makes me pretty fabulous. But I also realize there's 7.5 billion people on this planet, and it's impossible to think that those schools have captured all the smart people in the world. There's way more smart people, way more motivated people, way more talented people, energetic, creative, good-hearted people in this world than go to any of the specific schools that might spring to mind. So I think what we're really looking for are people who want to succeed, and they've got a certain amount of brain power, a certain amount of skill power, but they've got a lot of heart and a lot of courage, or fearlessness.
Absolutely. Moving forward, there are a lot of people. There's a huge problem of unemployment in this region, for that matter, everywhere in the world, because there's a large youth population here. What sort of advice would you give to these young people getting into the workplace, looking for entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial ideas and so on? What sort of advice would you give to them? How do they reinvent themselves?
That's a great question, because I do think that for young people, entrepreneurship is a fantastic choice, because it really does come down to you. And even when times are tough, there's always things that people need. We have an expression that we use, which is you have to fish where the fish are, right? If you want to be successful. So I think if you can identify a genuine unmet need and then work very hard to meet that need, no matter what it is, you stand a really good chance of succeeding.
The world is getting into automation, into robotics, and so on. So it's exacerbating this issue of potential future joblessness. Firstly, what is your thesis on that? And secondly, what is your advice for people who need to prepare themselves over the next 5 to 10 years with all of these new changes coming in?
Yeah, well, first of all, I do hope that governments and leaders are really wise about how this robotics and automation takes hold. In the United States where I live, there's 50,000 truckers who could be without a job.
Absolutely.
And I think as a society, we really need to say, what choice do we want to make here? Is this a good choice that we're making?
What about learning different things? Because, when we move from a horse car to a car, when we move from calculators to computers, when we move from hardware to software, we always thought the world will be different and we will have a massive jobless environment. But we always found a way to do, we found a way out of that. I dare say we will find a way out from this too. The only difference, in my opinion, as far as the current world is concerned, is the speed of change. That's the only shift. Change has always been there. So I think governments are probably too slow. It probably needs the private sector to respond. And it needs the individual to respond far more than governments, because they just won't be able to, they'll be behind the curve every single time. And that's sort of...
I don't know. I would imagine that you'd have, or there would be, and again, I'm not advocating, huge big government interventions, but I to that point, I can't imagine that you can put a driverless car on the road or a driverless truck on the road without having some kind of government, intervention there. So, or support or lack thereof. So I would think so. But, look, there's all sorts of jobs that are not going to be automatable.
Correct.
So I think, and people would characterize those as the creative jobs, the super creative jobs, the interpersonal jobs, the physical therapist, the therapist, the dog trainer, all, I saw that on your list. But these lists are being made. And so I think that as a young person, good grief, why would you go become a bank teller? Why would you go become a travel, agent? Why would you go do something that is clearly going to be automated? Right. So, be smart. Realize that the kinds of jobs that are going to be there are the ones that have much, much, much more human touch. But I would actually say, even HR jobs, which are much more around how do we manage our people, and maybe they'll become how do we integrate our people in our technology. Those are the kinds of jobs that are going to be okay.
Kate, you seem like a person who's come from a wonderfully gifted environment. Your parents were wonderful. You went to the best schools in the world. You worked for some of the most amazing companies in the world. Now you're traveling the world as a big consultant and author and everything. Have you ever encountered failure?
Every day. Every day.
You don't seem like it. You're superwoman. I can see the blue cape flying behind you.
Not true. You're my biggest fan. Thank you for that. No, just last week I flamed out. I did a really terrible job. I have a process I have to go through, sort of a mental preparation before I get up and give a talk.
Right.
And last week I was somewhere, and for a variety of reasons, I didn't do that, and I did a terrible job.
Wow, how terrible to do a terrible job. Really failure is a bit more than that.
No, really.
Did you ever encounter despair? Did you ever encounter joblessness? Did you ever encounter no money? And I mean that seriously, because a lot of people actually, and we spoke about entrepreneurship, a lot of people actually have to start understanding those kinds of difficulties. Empathy.
Have true empathy.
Yeah.
Well, yes, indeed. I have been fired.
Okay, great.
I have been fired. I have been, undermined. I have been, a lot of these terrible things you hear about in sort of corporate environments,
Yeah.
I have been in the situation of doing, okay, this is going to sound really arrogant, but like doing too good a job.
Right.
And, for my sins, gotten out of the picture.
Yeah.
So, I've had all those experiences. I've had the experience of saying, hey, let's bring a discussion of, women in leadership into this, and being told that I was being selfish and out for myself. And so, please leave. So I've had all sorts of, we all experience these things.
What advice do you give your two young daughters who are now in their teens?
Yeah, they're both 19 years old. I
Yeah.
have twins, and I actually advise them to. I've long been saying that they should be entrepreneurs,
Okay.
because they're both pretty self-starting, and they're pretty smart. But most of all, I want them to be able to control their own environment, because I have experienced these things.
Right.
I really have experienced these things, and lots of people look glossy from the outside,
Right.
and you don't see all the things that made them have the grit that it takes to succeed.
How do you develop grit in young people? How do you build that resilience in
Yeah.
your 19-year-olds?
I think you don't hover over them. I think they have to figure out how to do things. And, some people, I think, just have more internal grit. But I think they also look to you for role model. If you curl up like a doodle bug when things get hard,
Yes.
they'll think that that's okay.
Right.
And I actually have a former colleague, who every time things got hard, he went to bed. And I thought, why on earth do you do that? And he said, he goes, oh, my mother did that.
Interesting.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it actually was so funny, because once I pointed that out, he realized what he was doing.
Yeah.
So I think that we have to be the role models for our kids, where, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. I know it's a cliche, but it's true. And as my father always used to say, what did he used to say? I think he's quoting Chekhov or something. But he would say, it's a great life if you don't weaken.
Yeah. Yeah, my father used to say that if it doesn't kill you, it probably makes you stronger.
Exactly.
And my mum used to sort of protect me. My father used to say, go.
Off you
It
go,
was-
off you go.
And
So,
it was wonderful. And that's one of the reasons I've become very resilient
Yeah.
and very strong.
yeah. But people do comment on how my girls are very resilient, and they can keep on ticking. Yeah.
Tell us about the assignments that you're working on in the emerging markets, because that's an area that you're specializing in terms of reinvention. What sort of experiences are you getting there? Is it a different environment to the West? Are the experiences different to you?
Actually, I'm kind of amazed at how universal the experience of reinvention is. The concern about the disturbances that we're having, and they can come at people from everywhere. We're dealing with a couple of multinationals that are based in the emerging world, and they're in the food business, and they're in the hotel business, hospitality business,
Yeah.
and they're in the apparel business. And let me tell you something. Those are global businesses that are being, disturbed, that are being reinvented, that are being disrupted. And, they're just as worried as anybody else is about, who's going to come up with some new form. Is it going to be a different taste? Is it going to be a different delivery? Is it going to be a different way of cooking things? Is it going to be somehow meeting the needs of this demographic? They're just about as worried about it as anybody else.
Are you living a perfect life in your own eyes at the moment?
Indeed not.
Why not? Because you have, the world's your oyster, you could do exactly what you want to do. Why aren't you?
Well, because I can't do exactly what I want to do, because like everybody else, I'm trying to build a business,
Okay.
right? And when you're trying to build a business, you have to work very hard. You have to make sacrifices. You have to, I'm getting the feeling you think my life is very glamorous, but actually, I'm going to be, I've been on the road for 2 weeks, and I'm staying in my 8th different place.
Okay.
And it's tiring, it's exhilarating, but it's also demanding.
So let me give another perspective. I'm in exactly the same position. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm struggling. I have cash choking here and there. I have all sorts of issues like that. But am I living my almost dream life? The answer is absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I jump out of bed every morning. I mean, fatigue is there, but so what?
Yeah.
So are you living your dream in that way? So at least you're going in the direction that you want to go in?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I really can't imagine doing anything else.
Yeah, this is what I mean. And I think when you get to that point, you've actually arrived. When you wake up in the morning and you don't go to work. You just do what you're born to do. You reach out and
that is true.
And engage with that. So issues like fatigue and changing hotels and so on. It's boring and it's tedious, but the fundamentals are so much stronger. People ask me this question all the time: why the hell are you doing what you're doing? Mm-hmm. You could quite easily be in a fancy job.
I've attempted to have jobs.
Okay.
and it really isn't. It doesn't work very well for me.
Right.
Because I need to be creating my own space.
Right.
That's just it's what I do, and I have a fantastic partner. I mean, Shane is a fantastic partner, and we're very yin and yang. Mm-hmm. We have really different styles and different strengths and weaknesses, but we have an extremely common mission. Yeah. We want to have the same outcome, and we bring different things to the table.
So, do you think that is one of the elements, the secret sauce, in terms of a successful environment, is to have a wing person?
He's not my wing person. We are equal.
Okay.
Yeah, I know, that's true. I mean, he is a very, very strong person. Mm-hmm. And he's a very driving person. So, I mean, for me, it's a yin-yang thing. There isn't a dominant character. To be honest, he's the dominant character. He's very driving. And to me, that's great. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
Looking forward 10 years from now, what are the sort of things that you would have achieved in terms of your business and in terms of your life?
Oh, we will have had a huge impact on how people think and do leadership. I think I genuinely hope and believe that we're going to democratize leadership inside a company, mm-hmm. that we really will help lower power distance mm-hmm. inside of companies, and we will help more people have voice. Because I think that that's actually how you're going to have much better companies, not just in terms of what their results are, financial results, mm-hmm. but you'll bring in more sensibilities. Yeah. And when you bring in more sensibilities, hopefully we'll have companies that'll be more creative around, how they conduct themselves in the world.
New leadership versus new models of technology and working. Are they all coming together? And what are the 2 or 3 things we need to look for to align?
That's the dream. I mean, the dream is that because we live in world. Well, if you just had a traditional sort of, the old military style, the boss tells what to do and the decisions cascade down, and that's just how it happens. Mm-hmm. That's an impossible model in a complicated world. Right. It's an impossible model because that person can't know enough, mm-hmm. and so you have to have. You really have to think of it more as terms of a network than a pyramid. Mm-hmm. And all those nodes need to be taking in information and sharing information. And everyone's experimenting with how do you actually do that? How do you actually maximize that? And how do you get the decisions to the right places?
So if there was a time capsule around us and we would project ourselves into the future, and today is your 90th birthday, and we come to celebrate your 90th birthday, what will we be saying about Kate? What has she achieved in the next 40, 50 years?
She tried hard.
Well, a bit more than that. Will you be a grumpy granny?
No, I'm going to be a fabulous granny.
You're a gorgeous granny, so
I'm going to be a great granny. Actually, because okay, you asked me the future. I actually would like to be in a place that when I do have grandchildren, that I'm really not working so hard.
Okay.
Because I would like to be very, very involved in that, and I would love to be able to support. Should my girls do that, I would love to be able to support them so they can go out and do their things. Mm-hmm. So it's.
So apart from being a grandmother, any other achievements that we will be celebrating?
Well, I do need to write my great American novel.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm really happy about with my life, there's many things I'm happy about with my life. One of the things I'm happy about is I feel like I really have, lived a pretty vivid life. Right. I mean, I've had a lot of really high quality experiences. Right. And I'm in my 40th country at this point, and I'm not stopping. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to take up free diving.
Okay, obviously.
I've just had a tremendous number of experiences, and I've met a tremendous number of people, and I've had successes and failures, and I don't know. I think I've tried to make the most of being on this planet.
Excellent. Kate, love your story, love your energy, love the way you engage with the whole world, and you're traveling, and you're Wonder Woman. As I started this whole question, this whole thing,
So not.
and humble with it, which is even
No,
better. That
truthful.
that makes you even more perfect.
No blindfolds on that one, I'll tell you. Yeah.
Well, it's really been delightful to have you here. Delightful to come to our little office. And
Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much indeed. Real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.